possible outbreaks north of the border.
Definitely an outbreak of influenza A.
Type A influenza virus.
The swine flu epidemic.
Donald J. Trump is now President of the United States. President Obama is the ex-president. And Mr. Trump, for the moment, steps away for the inaugural address.
What a great honor to be able to introduce for the first time ever anywhere the 45th President of the United States of America, Donald.
Commune by Joshua Gayou. So, for whatever reason, I've always been drawn to the end of the world type books. I think it started back in school, sifting through the public library and finding a copy of Z for Zachariah. And ever since then, I've always been kind of drawn to that genre. And it always amazed me on how such a narrow focused genre you can have such variety. And the funny thing is there's certain things in end of the world books that I can't stand. And one of those is when it's heavily militarized. So, okay, there's a flu that breaks out. Susie Homemaker digs through the closet, finds a gun, and then suddenly they're a ninja, kicking everyone's butt. Nobody can touch them, but they're the hero of the story, and so suddenly, even though they have absolutely no experience, they just become an instant tough guy. Then you got those books who have those groups of psychos, you know, like the power is out for 1 week, and then suddenly all of you got to become cannibals. Okay, maybe not a week, but you get the point. I think one book that comes to mind with that was, I think it was 1 second after, or 1 minute after, or whatever it was. And also, Lucifer's Hammer was kind of like that too. And to be honest, a lot of these books in these genres tend to be just downright depressing. And the funny thing, at least the funny thing to me is that in this book, or I should say all three of these books so far, there's hints of all of that in these books. There's obviously the heavily militarized characters, and you got your fair share of psychopaths. But the funny thing is that he did it really well. Gibbs, for example, sounds like an old tired soldier. He sounds experienced, so it makes sense for him to be the way he is. And because he's around, he's able to train other people. And so you have your kind of half-trained people around him going out scavenging, and it makes sense. It's not instantaneous. They're trained under his supervision. As a matter of fact, that portion of the book, I think that was in the second one, where he started screaming at one of the characters, so he made him run around with a stick because he didn't trust him with a rifle. I've got family that went through military training, and that's kind of how drill sergeants are, so it made sense. But to be honest, I'm not really that surprised, because after listening to 3 books, one thing becomes very clear, in the writing style at least, is that it seems like he takes his time telling the story. So each character, even the minor ones, seem as though they're real people. The dialogue and the interchange between this mishmash group of people from all different walks of life who are kind of forced together in this valley to survive, all of it sounds very real. Like they could be real people in the real world. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them are modeled after people that the author knows. And so that, with the author's non-rushed storytelling style, for me at least, the stories seem to flow very naturally. Yes, there's the military side of things. Yes, there's the bad guy group and the occasional weirdo here and there. But in my opinion, it's done balanced. It's not so overly focused on those one things to the point where you start to get depressed almost listening to it. There is also a fair amount of what I'll call world building. And yeah, they got a little bit of a head start with the characters that they got the cabin from, kind of already half setting it up. But there's a lot of stuff that they had to figure out, especially since the group keeps growing, which to be honest is kind of my favorite part of the book, or books. Because a lot of those books out there, they focus a lot on scavenging. And there is some of that in this book too. But if that's all your group of people is going to focus on for survival, that's ultimately a short-term solution. Eventually all that crap is going to run out. And so the characters really focus on being self-sustaining. As a matter of fact, after listening to this book, I kind of walk through my own house and think, well, how much of this crap do I really need? And what would I do if I lost everything tomorrow? What would I really miss? And I think it was in the first book, if I'm not mistaken, where there's kind of a little bit of a rant talking about the handle on a faucet and how it's basically magic. You turn the lever, fresh, clean water that you can drink comes out, and it doesn't stop coming out until you shut it off. Yet most of us walk right past the faucet, don't even give it a second thought. Yet how many people in the world don't even have that much? So even though the story is obviously a fiction story, after listening to it, you almost get the sense like you want to keep this book in your back pocket, just in case you end up in a situation, you know, an end of world type. Everyone drops dead around you and you gotta kind of rebuild civilization. You'll be glad you listened to this book. Even though the author did a really good job, I think, developing the story so far, I still have to say my all-time favorite is still Alas Babylon. But I will say that this series is kind of a updated version of that, I would say. I think The Last Babylon was written in the 50s, and it sounds like it was written in the 50s, although with Last Babylon, the threat of nuclear war is sadly, I think, a little bit more likely than a plague and, what is it, a CME, solar flare, basically. Either way, the end result is basically the same. Another one of my favorites would be kind of up there in that same category would be Earth Abides, which is also, I think, a flu or a virus. Also very old, also one of the classics. I even tried to write my own version, more just to have one, not like I thought I was going to become a best-selling author or anything, but the experience was good. And in doing my research, there's another book that I came across that was very good, a little bit dry. I did a review for all of these below, but the Great Influenza was also a really good book, but I think it was Jonathan Mayberry. Difference is with that one, even though it's dry and it's a lot of statistics, that actually happened in 1918, so it's pretty scary. But coming away from listening to this one, it does kind of make you think of what's important in your life. I myself live in a very tiny house. My house is about 330 square feet, and I'm walking around after listening to this book thinking of more stuff that I could probably get rid of and do without. Just identifying what's a need and what's a want and what's just junk. Check back, I just started a new channel called Shelter. I'm actually in the works of purchasing another project, which I think I'm going to document renovations. It's another small house, kind of like my own, but unlike my own, I wasn't able to document mine, really kind of record the process of gutting it and rebuilding it and making it livable. There's nothing up there now, but check back periodically. Hopefully I'll be able to close that deal pretty soon. Otherwise, leave comments below on what you thought of this book. Also, if there are any other end of the world types that you've come across that are great, maybe I don't have them listed, let me know what those are. Also, this book was narrated by one of my personal audiobook heroes, R.C. Bray, so really no question there. You know he's going to do a good job. Basically, I don't think I've ever listened to a book that he did a crappy job narrating. But I can say that it did make my commutes to work a lot easier. It kept my mind occupied on something other than soul-crushing traffic, which is always a good thing. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time.